All right, this is the second part of Chapter 4 of Lincoln, How Abraham Lincoln Ended Slavery in America by Harold Holzer. Unlike Douglas, Lincoln felt true sympathy for enslaved people. He was discouraged to see that all the powers of earth seemed rapidly combining to increase the misery of individual slaves. Lincoln made people pay attention to his eyes by using language everyone could understand. Not every white voter knew what it was like to be a slave. So Lincoln reminded them that a slave was like a lifetime prisoner and a slave owner was no better than a jailer. They have him in his prison house, Lincoln pointed out. They have closed the heavy iron doors upon him, and now they have him, as it were, bolted in with a lock of 100 keys, which can never be unlocked. In 1858, the Republican Party of Illinois chose Abraham Lincoln to run against Douglas for the U.S. Senate. By now, almost all voters in the state knew that the one and only issue in the campaign would be slavery. The combined weight of the controversial Kansas-Nebraska Act and the equally charged Dred Scott decision couldn't be ignored. What would the future of the country be under these new rulings by Congress and the court? In accepting the nomination in June, Lincoln left no doubt where he believed the nation was heading, either to total freedom or total slavery. Taking the podium at the state capitol building on a hot June evening, he began by quoting from the Bible and then explained how the verse applied to the United States. A house divided against itself cannot stand. That's a pretty important, pretty famous quote. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. No doubt what the candidates' positions were on the slavery issue. Douglas believed voters in new territories should have a right to vote to include or outlaw slavery themselves. Lincoln believed that they had no right to do so and that slavery must not be allowed to spread further under any circumstances. Then Lincoln hit upon an ingenious idea to get the attention of undecided voters. Undecided voters are the ones who haven't made up their mind. He challenged Douglas to a series of public debates to argue over the issue again and again. The senator was cornered. He was far better known than his Republican opponent, had nothing to gain by sharing platforms with him at major political events. Yet in that day, the code of manhood required Douglas to accept. If he refused, he would have been branded a coward. So Douglas reluctantly agreed to 7 debates with Lincoln. And from August to October, the two candidates argued over the slavery issue from the northern outposts of the state to the southern. Astonished by the overwhelming public interest in the debates, one New York reporter marveled, "The prairies are on fire." Lincoln and Douglas broke no new real ground on the slavery issue during their famous debates that summer and fall. Their opinions remained fixed, their opposition to each other's position unbreakable. But the Lincoln-Douglas debates turned into a huge public attraction anyway, well attended by tens of thousands of raucous spectators. Raucous means kind of rowdy. Politics was so popular at the time that the debates brought people by horseback, boat, and train. Others walked miles on foot. Mary attended at least one of the debates, as did young Robert, wearing the uniform of a club called the Springfield Cadets to the last debate. The speeches by Lincoln and Douglas attracted much daily newspaper coverage too, and were closely followed by readers not only in Illinois but nationwide. For the first time, the newspapers hired stenographers to take down every word of the debates in shorthand. Their transcripts were then rushed off to Chicago, set in type, and printed in just a few days, a process so breathtakingly fast for the mid-19th century that, relatively speaking, it approached the immediacy of the modern-day blog or tweet. The debates themselves did not always bring about the best in either of the two candidates or their audiences. Lincoln and Douglas attacked each other personally, and each exaggerated his opponent's record. Douglas accused Lincoln of wanting slavery to spread nationwide. He did not. And Douglas accused Lincoln of favoring racial equality. He did not. Excited crowds often interrupted the speakers to shout encouragements or insults, or to laugh at Lincoln's jokes. Fistfights often broke out among Lincoln and Douglas fans in the back rows, where too much food and liquor sometimes made tempers flare. As for the speakers, they were more often than not at their worst. Eager to make Lincoln appear to favor black equality, Douglas freely used controversial words and hysterically warned that electing the Republican would mean integration and intermarriage. To quiet fears that he secretly approved of racial equality, Lincoln opened the fourth debate at Charleston, not far from where his stepmother lived, with a particularly unattractive reminder that he was still very much a white supremacist. I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. That I am not now, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters or jurors of black people, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. He still believed that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. In holding this insensitive view, Lincoln was no different from the overwhelming majority of white men of his time. But then he made clear precisely what separated him from opponents like Douglas and the truly racist Democrats. There is no reason in the world why the Negro is not entitled to all the rights enumerated in the Declaration of Independence, the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I hold that he is as much entitled to these as the whiter man. At their very first debate at the college village of Ottawa, Lincoln used tough language to attack Senator Douglas for believing otherwise. When he is saying that the Negro has no share in the Declaration of Independence, he is going back to the year of our Revolution and is muzzling the cannon that thunders its annual return. When he is saying, as he often does, that if any people want slavery, they have a right to have it, he is perverting the human soul and eradicating the light of reason and the love of liberty on the American continent. To another audience, Lincoln made light of Douglas's charges that he favored racial equality. He admitted he might never marry a woman of color himself, but pointed out, I have no objection to anyone else doing so. If a white man wants to marry a Negro woman, let him do it, if the Negro woman can stand it. Privately, Lincoln made his innermost feelings clear. As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master, he jotted down on a scrap of paper. This expressed my idea of democracy. Whatever differs from his is no democracy. Lincoln had always believed slavery was a tyrant demon that made life horrible for whites as well as blacks. The challenge was how to make more moderate and conservative voters understand its moral and political consequences. On October 15, 1858, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas met for their seventh and final debate in the town square at Alton, a village nestled along the Mississippi, the river past which Lincoln had once steered a flatboat en route to the slave-holding South. Douglas's usual powerful, deep voice sounded hoarse that day. He was exhausted from the months of speech-making. Lincoln had made just as many speeches as his opponent, but his high, clear voice sounded as strong as ever that day. Here, the Republican choice for the Senate gave his most stirring explanation of why slavery was morally wrong, not only for America, but also for oppressed people the world over. That is the real issue. That is the issue that will continue in this country when these poor tongues of Judge Douglas and myself shall be silent. It is the eternal struggle between these two principles, right and wrong, throughout the world. They are the two principles that have stood face to face from the beginning of time and will ever continue to struggle. The one is the common right of humanity and the other the divine right of kings. It is the same principle in whatever shape it develops itself. It is the same spirit that says, you work and toil and earn bread, and I'll eat it. No matter in what shape it comes, whether from the mouth of a king who seeks it to bestride the people of his own nation and live by the fruit of their labor, or from one race of men as an apology for enslaving another race, it is the same tyrannical principle. In the end, the debates were not enough to propel the anti-slavery Republicans to victory. Douglas defeated Lincoln after all. If people had voted directly for either of the two candidates, Lincoln might well have squeezed out a narrow win. But in those days, Lincoln and Douglas's names did not even appear on the Illinois ballot. Instead, voters elected state legislators who in turn chose senators themselves. In 1858, enough Democrats won the election to the state legislature to ensure that Douglas would be chosen for another term in Washington. And he was. Lincoln was initially crushed by the defeat, but soon bounced back, vowing that where the slavery issue was concerned, he would not give up. The slavery debate was just heating up. People still looked to him for leadership. For the future, Lincoln pledged to a friend. My view is the fight must go on. And to another he wrote, the cause of civil liberty must not be surrendered at the end of one or even 100 defeats. Another explosion will come soon. That's the end of chapter 4.